we spoke about the report of the inquiry that the Israeli army had on about the 7th of October, and calling it a massive failure, total collapse of the security and military establishments in the first several hours, the collapse of the Gaza division in the first 2 hours. And more analysts are talking about exactly what happened and where the problems lied, at least in relation to the intelligence side. Our own mistakes only? Was there something from the other side that made it more difficult for us? What exactly was the case? And during this analysis, it wasn't only the report, it was also information that came from Israeli analysts about the failure, about the massive failure from Israel on the 7th of October and following the 7th of October. And during several reports, multiple analysts in Israel were saying that it's as if we were completely blind. It's as if we were completely blind, despite the warnings that we had, despite all of the technology that we use, unprecedented technology, despite the wall that they built around Gaza with all of these sensors, costing over 1 billion just several years back, despite the fact that Gaza is recorded almost by the second. What did you feel? How did we feel? Well, one of the senior military analysts in Israel, he said that there's a big problem in understanding the communication of the leaders of Hamas. Why? Because in 80% of the conversations between the leaders of the military wing of Hamas and also the political wing of Hamas, they are quoting Quranic verses. And those who don't understand these verses, they can't really grasp what's being said exactly in that conversation. So I'm talking to you and then I'm quoting a certain verse, and then, we understand what the interpretation means, this code language. And that was a big part of the failure. The second part is, and that part actually was published on the Israeli Channel 12, is during the past 15 years, to be more accurate, after Hamas came to power inside of Gaza, well, one report said on Israeli Channel 12, based on sources in that community, that the Israeli Military Intelligence Directorate, or Aman in Hebrew, they failed to recruit anyone in Gaza. They failed to recruit even one operative. Now, that's not all of the Israeli intelligence community, like the Shin Bet or any other intelligence, but that's specifically the Israeli Military Intelligence Directorate. And they have to have operatives, by the way, and they work in line with, side by side with other intelligence agencies inside of Israel. They said we couldn't recruit one person in 15 years, coinciding with the rise of Hamas. And 15 years is approximately the time where the previous leader of Hamas in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, was controlling the movement. What is the link between the two? Well, Sinwar, before he was arrested, he was leading a movement in parts of Palestine called Majd. And that part of Hamas, they were focusing on hunting down anyone who collaborates with Israel. And they were very fierce with anyone who operates with Israel. When he came to Gaza, that started to be the mainstream thing. That's like normal. Anyone who even dares to deal with Israel, this is what's going to happen to them. What was the action? What was the main action that came following this? It came in the form of deception from the Palestinian resistance by having its own operatives who weren't well known, pretending to be operatives for Israel, or pretending to want to work with Israel in return for, money or whatever. Therefore, dealing with Israel, getting more knowledge, apart from their technological and hacking skills that we saw not only in the past year, but in the past decade, they were working with them and they were giving them false information about the Palestinian resistance that could be deemed as accurate. However, they were only misleading them. And that was something that contributed to the massive Israeli failure on the 7th of October and following the 7th of October. Even during the genocide, when Israel was conducting a genocide, over 60,000 people martyred, thousands not found, over 150,000 wounded, total destruction, they failed miserably in splitting the society in Gaza, affecting the social cohesion, because the Palestinian resistance would have found it more difficult to operate if there was a hostile environment. Israel tried to create a hostile environment, especially through the aid, through something that the people need so much, by not allowing aid in, and then potentially trying to deal with certain criminal movements inside of Gaza to spread this aid to the public, which of course was met with fierce resistance from the majority of the population and movements and leaders inside of Gaza. And then after the ceasefire began, and even before the ceasefire began, the security side of the Hamas government inside of Gaza started to take severe action against them, in many cases offensives where people were killed as well. So this is the second part that we were talking about. Now, we want to try and understand what's going to happen then. Everyone is interested to know what is going to happen. Are we going to see a full-scale war? Is it going to escalate? Is Netanyahu going to go and sit down and do another U-turn like the U-turns that he's done before? Well, there are many reasons to believe that this ceasefire agreement that we have inside of Gaza is a ceasefire agreement that forces Israel to continue down the path of the ceasefire, with, of course, breaches, with problems. That's natural, because you're talking about a state that was established on these horrors. But this agreement forces Israel to continue. Clearly, we've seen that phase 1 ended. There's phase 2. There are breaches, and there have been breaches during the ceasefire too. But in Israel, there are no indications that they are planning for a full-scale operation inside of Gaza. They only have 2 divisions outside, they have more divisions in Lebanon, more special forces in Syria than they do in Gaza. There are no immediate orders for the Israeli army to prepare to go into Gaza. There are only orders from the Israeli Defense Minister Katz, the newly appointed defense minister, to tell the Israeli army prepare in case we need to go on an offensive. However, the talk in the Israeli mainstream media is about potentially having airstrike. I mean, the recent breach that they had was through a drone, not even their air force. Again, we can't really be sure if that's related to any clauses in the ceasefire agreement that hasn't been made public. But slowly, Egypt is now confirming, no, we are indeed talking about a 3-phase ceasefire agreement. Slowly, they're revealing more things. Now, on the other hand, it's still Israel, it's still the same country that committed and commits a genocide and ethnic cleansing in Gaza and the West Bank, draconian apartheid state, and having aggressions against Lebanon, against Syria, not keeping it a secret that they are an expansionist entity, trying to normalize this expansionism through many falsehoods. So there could be a problem, but that sits with the same notion that we spoke about from the beginning of this war, which is, well, I was asked in many cases by the community, like, where do you see this going? Well, I mean, what do you think is going to escalate, or are we going to ceasefire? Is it going to be peace? Are we going to have 2 states or whatever? And my answer from the beginning, from over a year ago, is still relevant today, which is either the war will continue and expand further, or there will be a de-escalation that will be on very high heat, very, very tense, up until we reach a stage where this actual de-escalation will break and things will go up in flames again. Because it does not look like there's anything that can be resolved here with the existence of the state of Israel in the form in which it exists and has existed since its inception. Is there a formula that can be, done? Can the Israeli leaders or someone collapsing Netanyahu and coming back again, can they come up with this new formula that is willing to live with others, that is willing to accept that there are Palestinian people and they need a state? We need to concede, they need to concede. Let's find some sort of an agreement. Unlikely. Israel is passing laws. They passed a law during this genocide, which passed with over 90% majority vote. We refuse the establishment of a Palestinian state, end of, period. Whether it's led by Hamas or it's led by the Palestinian Authority or it's led by anyone. We refuse the establishment of a Palestinian state. And what they push for is a propaganda of denial, of denying the existence of the Palestinian people as a people. How ironic. The people who came from Ukraine and Belarus and Russia and other parts of Europe and the world and changed their names and created this new false nationality are telling the natives of the land, no, you actually don't exist. We are the real people. We are the true ones. Again, defying history, going against the whole history, even of the Jewish people inside of Palestine who were in Palestine the whole time, up until this Zionist ideology came to Palestine and started to impose this terror inside of Palestine and expansionism and ethnic cleansing and so many problems. So the current short term, there are reasons to believe that Benjamin Netanyahu might do another U-turn. What are the indications for that? Well, Donald Trump, there was a report that he will be meeting families of the Israelis who were released and some of the actual Israelis who were released from Gaza. Why is that important? Well, that's important because some of those who were released from Gaza refused to meet Benjamin Netanyahu. Some of them released videos of them criticizing him when they were in Gaza. Of course, Israel said, oh, it was made up. Well, why didn't you go and hug him after he went out? The majority of them, hardly anyone saw Benjamin Netanyahu. Their families, they say Benjamin Netanyahu is a killer. He killed some of those who went out dead by the confirmations of those who were released. Confirmations from the IDF and Yoav Gallant himself, who said we implemented the Hannibal Directive inside of Gaza. So Donald Trump, in effect, is meeting or is about to meet, according to reports, hostile people who are hostile to Benjamin Netanyahu. So on one hand, he's acting like his servant when he goes to the United States. And yes, you can go ahead and do whatever you want. But on the other hand, well, he's meeting those who are calling him a criminal, a murderer, mass murderer. And these people have been having mass protests inside of Israel. Again, protests that are not really spoken about that much in mainstream media. In Israel, there were 70 protests, 70 locations that had protests in the past couple of days, with hundreds of thousands of people asking for a completion, a continuation of the ceasefire agreement. Where was the mainstream media from these scenes? Where was the mainstream media and Western politicians who are still aligned with Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu from the popular demand of many in Israel? Of course, we can't be conclusive, to stop the war. To reach a ceasefire agreement, to a level where they started listening to the leaders of the resistance rather than their own leaders, saying that we trust them more than we trust Benjamin Netanyahu, because this man lies more than he breathes. Where were they? So Donald Trump is meeting with these people who have, in the protests in Israel, they will raise banners asking for help from the American administration, not from the Israeli administration. They've lost faith in Israel, by the way. They thought that they can have some sort of faith in figures in the government. It was previously Yoav Gallant and those who are negotiating, who accepted the ceasefire over a year ago that Benjamin Netanyahu refused multiple times. They thought that they can have some sort of faith in them. only for them to see them going away like flies, resignations, or Netanyahu putting them aside. And the man is continuing down this one-person control, dictatorship, absolute dictatorship approach. This meeting shows that, well, Trump, although he's giving these signals to Benjamin Netanyahu, he might actually be pushing for a continuation alongside Steve Witkoff. And they temporarily told Benjamin Netanyahu, look, we'll come up with this offer to try and see if it works with Hamas. And on the other hand, Hamas, what they received instead from Hamas is Hamas telling them, I'm not in the negotiations. They are not in the negotiations. That's number one. Number two, adding more conditions, especially with the way that the Israeli prisoners of war are being released. Why? Because Benjamin Netanyahu had so many delays. Previously, he refused to release Palestinians after Israelis were released. And Hamas told them those days are over. So if we go on to phase 2, you will no longer be receiving, I mean, they haven't said that explicitly, but we saw that happening when the bodies were released just a few days ago. But this would be one of the things that Hamas is projected to ask Israel for, because they haven't really released that much, but this is what we understand from the notion. So it's going to be more difficult on Israel in phase 2, simply because of Benjamin Netanyahu's arrogance that led to nothing, but making it more difficult because he made the U-turns eventually. And of course, the Israeli population is seeing this, and the global population is seeing this as well.